Hello and welcome back to another video on our series in multiple regression analysis. So in our last video, we talked about heterodacity and autocorrelation, and we checked both of those in our model to make sure it did not exist. We do not want those two wonderful concepts in our model. And so because of that, we can move on to the next situation, which is we need to check that our residuals are normally distributed. This is just one of the assumptions of our model. And then at the same time, we're going to be checking that the mean of the residuals equals pretty much close to 0. So for the checking for the normality, we're going to do it visually. And so what we'll do is we'll check for the normality of the residuals. There's a wonderful plot called a QQ plot. And so that's in the stats model as well, QQ plot. Again, we pass through our residuals. And then we do a line, which is that. And then we just make sure to pylab.show. Where is it? Oh, I think I need to I don't think I imported that one. That's unfortunate. Pylab. Oh, pylab. There we go. Perfect. Okay. And so here's our QQ plot. Basically, what we want is we want our residuals closely hugging this line, because this is the theoretical quantity and here is the sample quantity. So theoretically, it should be right here. And what we're saying is, hey, that sample quantity is actually really close to it. And so we want these data points to closely hug this line. So if it closely hug, at least visually observing, what we can say is that our data is normally distributed. So if it's something like this where the values are way over here, then we cannot say our data is normally distributed. And then I am going to also check that the mean of the residuals is also 0. It's not going to come out exact, but I'll explain why. Check that the mean of the residuals is approximately 0. And so what we'll do is we'll create a new variable called mean residuals equals sum estimate residuals, and then we'll do it by the length of the estimated residuals. And then what you'll notice is when we do this, it's not exactly 0, but it's pretty darn close. Reason why is when we're doing certain things, rounding errors do play a role if you start doing it enough times, so it will start to add up. But this is very, very close to 0. So what we can say is, hey, the mean of our residuals equals 0. And so really with that being said, we have met all of the core assumptions of our model. So we can say for the most part that everything is working nicely. The only thing that we might potentially run into a problem, I'll go back up here. Conservatively speaking, you should have about 20 observations per column of information. And right now we have about 10. And so there are some people who say 10 is enough. Technically, you only need 2 observations, but that's just being unrealistic. And so that is something that potentially they would say, well, we need more data because there's not enough for the number of variables that you're trying to model off of. So it's usually 20 for each column of data. That's the way you should think about it. So 20 for each attribute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage some of the stuff in the other workbook. This is stuff we have calculated in the previous linear regression one. And so this is calculating the measures of error. So we have mean absolute error, the mean squared error, and then the root mean squared error. So the mean is simply the absolute value of an error. So it gives you an idea of the magnitude, but no sense of a direction. So it's not going to tell you if the error was too high or too low. It's just saying on average, this is how big of an error you're making. The mean squared error is more popular than MAE because the mean squared error is punishing more significant errors. This one's treating them all the same. This one, because we're squaring it, basically what happens is if it's an error, it's going to go up in size. And so if it's bigger, it's going to be even a bigger number. And then we have the next one, which is the root mean squared error, which is the square root of this. The reason why this one is more popular is this is interpretable. How do you interpret a square of something? It's very difficult to do that. So that's why root mean squared error is a more popular metric, because it's easier to interpret. And all I'm doing here is I'm simply calling the certain metrics that I have calculated or pulled in from my sklearn library right up here. So mean squared error and the mean absolute error. And I'm just simply passing through my y-test and my y-predict. So basically my residuals. And it's calculating the MSE, the absolute error, and then I'm taking the square root of my MSE to calculate my RMSE. And then this is what we're getting out on it. And so the mean absolute error is 0.7, and then the RMSE is 0.8. So that's almost like a, 1% GDP growth in a sense, which, I mean, technically looking at the data, we had a pretty wide range. I mean, we were going from like -5 to, what was it, 14% in 1 year. So, I mean, this is basically what it's saying on average that you would get. So that's all that is. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next fun metric, which is R-squared. And with this one, it's very simple. We're going to create a new variable called model R2 that equals the R2 score. This is something we imported from our stats model. And then it's y-test and then y-predict. And then all we're going to do is we're just going to calculate the R-squared. It's 86%. So we're going to see there's actually a better metric that we can use. But all the R-squared is doing is it's saying how well does our data fit the model. And we're saying, hey, we can... ideally, we want a higher R-squared because it's saying that our data more fits the model, or how we can explain the variance in our data in our model. So ideally, you want a higher R-squared, but we're going to see that if you just keep adding variables, you're going to get a higher R-squared regardless of whether it's beneficial or not. The next thing we're going to talk about is confidence intervals. And so this one, it's just giving a range. I'm saying that 95% of the time. I have a definition right here. I think this is great. First, we talk about confidence intervals. Normally, you do 95% intervals, but how do you interpret it? We interpret by saying if the population from which the sample was drawn was sampled 100 times, approximately 95% of those confidence intervals would contain the true coefficient. That's basically all this is. So it's saying 95% of the time, if we sampled it 100 times, 95% of the times, those confidence intervals would be contain the true coefficient. Why do we provide confidence intervals? Well, it just boils down to the fact that we can't say anything happens for sure. And so we have to recognize the fact that there is uncertainty in our models. And so with that being said, we have to say, well, 95% of the time we expect it to be like this, but we can't say 100% for sure. And so I kind of put a general rule down here. You want a narrower range, you got to decrease your confidence. And if you want a wider range, so you want a wider range of confidence, you have to increase your confidence basically. And so if you want to capture more of this, you have to basically increase your confidence in that aspect. And then we have stuff about our p-values. Again, this will kind of make more sense when we do our little summary, but if you do estimate p-values, so the model, and then we do the p-values, you want lower numbers. And so we'll see that we actually can't accept all of them. And so from here, we can also do a model output. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print my model, and then I'm going to call this summary function. Okay, so then you get this beautiful table, which just summarizes a lot of the stuff that we were talking about. And we want to look through and say, what is all this stuff? And, what is the purpose of it? Well, here it tells us the type of model. We did ordinary least squares. Again, it gives us a date, a time, number of observations, number of residuals, the model, the covariance type, the R-squared, which was 89, and then we have an adjusted R-squared. The adjusted R-squared is going to penalize you for more complex models. So it will only increase if the variable is actually contributing more to the model. Otherwise, it's going to lower it. So just because you increase the number of variables, it will actually, it's not going to necessarily increase it. And that makes sense because that's kind of one of the drawbacks here is I can get this number up higher. I just got to add more variables. But that doesn't mean the variable that I added is actually contributing that much. So that's kind of the important part behind it. We get our 95% confidence intervals right over here. We get our coefficient estimates. We get our standard errors. We get our t-values, and then we get our p-values. Here, we want lower numbers. So here, we would technically have to... We're basically saying broad money growth, it's not very significant. It's not something we should include in our model. Also with unemployment, it's very high. Everything else, though, looks good. That's all fine. The constant, you'll actually see the constant. We should technically reject the constant as well. So the intercept, we'll see actually that we can keep it if we remove the other variables. So that's kind of what I'm going to say about that one for right now. But we can actually keep that one if we actually remove the insignificant variables. But really what we should be taking away from this one is we have some variables that were insignificant, and that's just the only other part. There's some other stuff down here that's kind of just reiterating some stuff we already tested up above, which was, are the variables normally distributed and things along that nature. And that's really what it's doing. But I put that down over here, kind of explain what those metrics are and kind of how you can think about them for the most part. So they're there in case, you want to, go in a little bit more detail. So what we're going to do next is we're going to actually remove the insignificant variables. And so that's actually really straightforward. So I'm just going to leverage kind of some stuff that I was doing up here. So I'm just basically recreating my original model. But all I'm doing is I'm just removing the variables that the first output was telling me that was insignificant. So this is kind of that iteration component. You're checking your variables. If they come back insignificant, you remove those variables. So I'm removing now government final, no, not that one, broad money growth and unemployment. And so I remove broad money growth and unemployment and also the highly correlated variables. And then I retrain my model just like that. And then I'm going to do another summary using the stats model. And then from here, we notice a wonderful thing. Now all of our p-values are good to go. In fact, our constant is even good to go. So that's all good. So now we're in a good spot where everything seems to kind of be meshing together. So everything's kind of coming out nice. We checked the assumptions of our model. We checked our p-values. We have our 95% confidence intervals and things along that nature. We've checked our R-squared. It's still coming out pretty strong. I mean, 88%, that's definitely not bad. And then we also, just different information that we can use to kind of reaffirm our assumptions about the model. But really interesting stuff. And then so here's our coefficient estimates again. So this is all what it's saying and how much it's impacting at the standard error. So this is basically we can think of it like the standard deviation, but it's now, it's an approximation of the statistical sample population. And then this one, the t-value is simply the coefficient divided by the standard error. So the higher the t-value, the more evidence we have to reject the null hypothesis. That's really what that is doing. And so I'm going to kind of wrap things up, and I am going to put this right over here. Again, all I'm doing is I just copy the code that I had up above. Everything is identical. I just simply removed the additional columns. I redid the stats model one. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to talk about pickling. So now that we've created a new model that removes the insignificant variables, we might want to save this model after training it on the data. Now in this example, we only had 40 rows of data, so it really doesn't make sense to pickle. You can run that pretty quickly. But if you had tens of thousands or millions of rows, you don't want to train it every time you just wanted to make a prediction or something like that. And so what you can do is we can pickle it. And so if we import our pickle library, what we do is we open up a new .sav file in write mode, and then we call pickle.dump, and we dump the model in the file. And so what this does is it's basically like a byte stream that we save to the file, and you get this little, I don't know if it's here. Where did I put it? I don't know if it ran it or not. Python, no, it didn't. Well, it's there now. Basically, it saves a little file like that. And if you try opening it, nothing's there. But I'll show you kind of there's literally nothing in it. You can't see anything, but it's just a bunch of mess. But basically, once you save it like that, you can then reload it back into Pandas. I mean, sorry, not Pandas, into Python, and basically pick up where you left off. And then from here, that's really what I'm doing is I'm just opening the one that I just created. And then I'm creating a new instance of my model, which is just simply the one that I loaded from my Pickle file, and I can make a new prediction. And so from here, I just took one of my values and I said, hey, make a prediction about 2002 or something like that, all that kind of fun stuff. And so I'm just saying, take all those values and what do you get if you predict it? And it says, oh, you get 7.60. So, that's kind of all that was demonstrating, is that you can save your model, you can open it back up, and you can make a prediction about it if you wanted to. So this definitely comes in handy with larger models. So with that being said, that is the end of this series. I know it was a long one, but I think it's important to go through those steps where you guys can see kind of the thought process behind it, because it's just a checklist. I mean, that's really all you're doing. It's just a checklist. But kind of just do a quick recap. It's a lot when you start looking at it. We talked about the linear regression model and kind of the assumptions behind it. We loaded it into Pandas, did some transformations and confirming that there were no null values, just like that. We then checked for multicollinearity. We didn't want variables that were highly correlated with each other, because that's a problem. It's the same information. It's redundant information, and there's kind of mathematical consequences that arise if we allow for multicollinearity. And we saw the different ways to help detect it. And then we saw a system for removing it, and a very systematic approach using a variance inflation factor. And then we talked about a scatter matrix plot to visualize the data. And then we talked about outliers and how to detect them, whether we should remove them or not. And then in this example, we decided not to remove them because it's an instance of an observed value that makes sense. But if we wanted to remove it, this is how we would approach it. We then built our model very similar to how we did it with the simple linear regression model. We started exploring our outputs, our intercept and our population and our coefficients and all that kind of fun stuff. We saw how to make predictions. We created a new instance of the model using the stats model API library. We checked for heterodacity, or in other words, non-constant error terms. We don't want that, and we saw ways for detecting it. We didn't have to remove any, but down the road, if that comes up, I can explain how to remove it. We checked for autocorrelation. So we saw the test and we saw the graph that we can use to help detect autocorrelation. We checked to make sure that our residuals were normally distributed and that the mean of the residuals equals 0. And then we talked about measures of error, so the mean absolute, mean squared error, root mean squared error. We talked about R-squared a little bit. We talked about confidence intervals. Hypothesis testing, so really just the p-values. You want low p-values, that way you can accept those variables. Talked about the summary output, and then we removed insignificant variables, retrained our model, created a new summary output, and then we talked about pickling. So if you have any questions about that, please put them down in the comments below, and I will try to get back to you. Hopefully you guys found this series useful. I know it was long, but I think, again, it's helpful to go through the steps. So, if you have any questions, please put them down below. Also, if you could make sure to like the video, we always appreciate the support. And if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you keep getting regular updates as we release new topics. I have started TD Ameritrade using their API. It's very fun, very useful. And then we will go into our next model, which is K nearest neighbors. It's not nearly as long as this one, thank God. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.